everybody. Welcome to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim Jousma, and joining me, I have the coolest member of the clergy. It is the Reverend Tracy. How you doing?
Oh, living the dream one nightmare at a time this season, as I often do in October's. In fun news for anybody that follows my personal page, I lost my wallet.
Yay.
So I get to discover the fun of traveling back home with no ID, which I guess the TSA will literally put a note on me that says, "I lost my ID. Please let me go home." And they'll let me go. It turns out it's not the big deal that sitcoms make it.
So like a scarlet letter or something.
Yeah, I just feel like it very much is going to be like that sticky note with the safety pin, just to make sure I don't lose that as well. But I don't think it'll actually be anything like that. It'll probably just be a note on my boarding pass.
A woman brings her kid and don't sit next to that woman.
Don't sit next to that. She's lost.
Well, this week we have ourselves a very special guest, someone brought to the show by you.
Yeah.
Tell us who that person is.
So this is another haunted house owner / director that I've worked with personally through my work with Fearlandia. I know I talk about that quite a bit on the show, that I work with Fearlandia and Hauntwork. David and I actually had tried last year, in the year that almost nothing happened, to also do the haunted drive-in, which I know I talked about on this show. Mm-hmm. And we've even worked a little bit before in prior years. David D. Jones. So sorry about that little stammer there. But anyway, so I will actually just turn it over to you, Tim, to ask your favorite question that you like to ask. But David, this is my friend Tim, and Tim, this is
Hi.
How are you doing? It is tradition on this show to ask anybody who is on for the very first time, what is your nerd origin story?
So when you say nerd origin story, how far in the Wayback Machine? How deep a connections? How deep a wells?
There is no wrong answer. I take it as far back as you are comfortable doing.
Yep, we had someone that met Chewie when they were a toddler that talked about that. Yeah. So, I mean, really as far back or as current as you want to go.
Okay. I guess, it would be Halloween itself. It was the magic of that night. And I think other people have also kind of expressed that there are certain values or ethos that kind of come up around Halloween that are specific to that night, or so rare enough that we kind of mark them and say, these are significant and these are attached to. So the feeling of Halloween was always very similar to that feeling before Christmas. For me, it was in the 70s. So everything was covered with flocked trees, and we would have these blinking lights in the Christmas tree. And I would spend hours just watching that tree with the lights blinking, would create caves, and it would create entire worlds just kind of in that blank space. It kind of was, this Rorschach-ian, kind of your mind could go and create stories after stories. And it was that feeling of that anything was possible. It was that things could be slightly different, askew, that it wasn't gifts, it wasn't the candy, it was that this is the night that things change. This is the night that things are slightly different. And, later on, we went on to kind of unpeel that onion and just, discover wonderful things about it, such as, honestly, as a culture today, Halloween's the only holiday that we actually feed those who come to our door. It's the only day that every child is safe. It's the only day we all agree to the largest game of tag or whatever. And if you, even starting early that morning, if you see another person with even an assemblage of costuming or, the funky Halloween sweater or the, light up pin, you now haven't agreed upon, oh, we're playing the same game. Oh, okay. Yes. And it's a continued throwing out of yes and conversations, just that we all agree on this one day. Everyone's going to play. Everyone's going to be nice. Everyone's going to be the type of human being we'd like to think we are or are striving to be. It's the night we're the most generative. It's the night that, like, when you're trick-or-treating, and alliances from schools completely disappear, and kids who normally never associated are together, and they're on towards a common vision, a common goal, and they're strategizing together. And okay, well, let's go up this street. Oh, no, I heard this street. And oh, we're sharing intel, and deep friendships that may only last 1 or 2 blocks before somebody has to peel off. And it was this welcoming, this kindness, this is how the world should be kind of element. So I guess kind of it starts with that. Like every obligatory, Dungeons and Dragons very heavily, Blue Box, OG represent, and the but it and then Halloween. And over the years, my appreciation, love, and distancing from, and time to put away children's toys, and kind of rediscovering is constantly in a state of evolution and or adaptation.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, you're saying that Halloween's always been around. So, how is it? It's kind of hard to say when it started, right? Because it's kind of always been this magical time for you as far back as you can remember.
Yes, and the more we kind of, and then once we decided to actually become haunters ourselves, once we actually opened, or I guess I should say, I'm David D. Jones. I'm with Creatures of the Night, a Portland-based haunt group. We're an all-volunteer. Our haunts are actually based in a therapeutic milieu. I come from a neuropsych background, so we actually build, and all good haunts, even unintentionally, kind of are constantly lending themselves to the process of trauma recovery. And so we very deliberately do that. Our stories, we tend to go for deep themed stories. So we actually do ours as a story structure. When we have the resources and time and the universe isn't on fire, we actually structure it as a 3-act story. This is introduction, this is our conflict, this is our resolution. And the more we kept, again, peeling and studying its own history, the more it kind of reveals itself to be that this is one of Jungian's universal concepts. This is something that is specific to our species and weirdly kind of like ingrained in what we are. Not Halloween itself necessarily, but almost every culture does have its honoring of the dead, and that has a very intentional, specific place in why you need that as part of a society and culture. But also, every society takes a cave, a hole, a bower, and brings others in and says, "These are the mysteries. This is what is occluded. These are the secrets." And that is universal to our species. And we almost seem driven to it. And we are just simply the modern iteration of something that dates back thousands of years and is universal to our species. In fact, there's some beautiful research being done about pictographs in underground caves in the last 15 years in archaeology, that there seems to be either a parallel genesis or a root written symbol language that we find in really old deep caves. We're talking 20,000 years old, but we're finding a commonality of pictograms all over the world. And so that research is still unfolding and isn't coming to conclusions yet, but is just, this is something that you are part of a much greater heritage. And I like it, and it's geeky, and I get to dress up. And when I was in high school, the girls I dated wore really attractive things on Halloween, and it was awesome.
So there's also that part of it. See, that's more Tim's appeal, because I know you're more into the flashy bang, and I would guess like maybe the prettier costumes of Halloween. You're allowed to correct me. I'm picking on you, but
it hits you at different times. At different. And I think maybe that's its endurance, is that over time what the hell? Maybe we can even make this. You kind of go through the maiden, mother, crone, or, you go through different aspects in Halloween. You start off as the recipient. Eventually you reach a level of generativity development, kind of like Erik Erikson. Like you go through stages of development to where you become the provider for the next generations. You're not the recipient of the gifts, etc., but you are now extending it to all right, sure. Let's go with stages of development.
So all that to say, I mean, Tim, do you like Halloween too? Like, was that a holiday you were always really into as a kid, or did you go trick-or-treating?
I believe I had talked about it on a previous episode with the house I grew up in. I mean, as a kid, a couple of times we did go out, but for the most part, my mother didn't like our neighborhood, so she would just ultimately like buy us a bag of candy, toss it, and just be like, "There." Oh God, that was Halloween.
So I was just curious because I figured, we all pretty much experienced celebrates the height of our trick-or-treating years in different decades.
Mhm.
You know, I was born in 85, so really I was more of a 90s trick-or-treater, right? So in the 90s, I remember though everybody was mortified of like any homemade treats because that was when the wives' tale of the razor and the apple was going on. So I was honestly curious, David, what do you remember? Do you remember any of like the think of the children's scares
Oh,
when
yeah.
you were a kid? So what was the big one for you? I know
Tylenol
Tylenol
scare.
turned out to be bunk, but what was
No,
that?
no, no. Oh, so actually, yeah. So there's a lot of history on this. So the Tylenol scare, 1981, 1982. That was the year that kind of shut down Halloween for my generation. So Halloween was gaining traction in the 70s. It had hit several amazing bumps in the 1950s, 1970s. Actually, San Francisco, the Castro district, really helped promote Halloween. But the 70s was when the very first movie with the word Halloween in its title at all came out, and that was Halloween. It was appearing, you know, Steven Spielberg normalized it with the scene with E.T. walking through Halloween and dressed up as characters. Halloween was really on this growth. Jim Baker, special effects artist in Burbank, they were starting this mass emergence of what would become the home haunt craze everywhere. So Halloween was really on this explosive kind of cultural boom in the 70s. It was, you know, television, you know, TV shows were put out regularly, specifically for each year. Cartoons aimed at kids, adults. Playboy Mansion was hosting its Halloween party and glamorizing it. So it was really, and then the Tylenol scare hit, which is it is fascinating all on its own. It's actually still taught in law school about debt and death. But 1982, the Tylenol scare, where every house was glowing. The next year, maybe 1 in 20 was open. Like, it shut down Halloween. And I have often wondered that if this generation, or, you know, my generation of people who build haunted houses, part of that was because this magical thing was growing, this thing was unfolding and becoming bigger and more real, and, you know, and it was taken away from all of us in 1 year.
Yeah.
And that denial, that taking away, that snatching the toy away from the child, I sometimes have wondered if that's why there is a specific age group of certain haunters, usually dads, who really have this push to build home haunts. And, you know, like me, you know, you don't just give the full size bar. I go out and get movie box candy. I will break your bag. I will come to my house. I don't care how old you are. You put on an effort, you make a costume, you do something that looks like you're creative. I will fill your frickin' bag. So anyway, that's one of those things that I wonder if that denial of it made us hunger it more, or want it, or realize its own vulnerability. And which we've seen in this cycle, 2021. So it'll be interesting to live another 30, 40 years and see if that cycle pops up again. We see another resurgence.
And it's interesting that you do talk about that time period, because 82 was kindergarten for me. So Halloween was the years after that, which,
yeah,
you know, I did not put into account the Tylenol thing, but it would kind of make sense that, you know, I didn't necessarily experience it as much because it probably was not around as much.
Yeah, it gave probably a real shakeup to the distrust of a community to feel attacked in that way and at random. So of course you want to protect the children. I mean, and I watched that one because I loved, well, one thing with the pandemic, it seems, is the plethora and range of documentaries that have come out on Netflix and everything.
Yeah.
And so the Tylenol scare was covered, and I didn't know about it because, you know, so that kind of makes sense to me, though, that would have an effect, because of course you would wonder what kind of monster was out there if that had just hit you.
Mm-hmm.
There was also, there's a really great book called Shock Value, whose author I'd have to look up, but really worth it, because he kind of also, or the authors explore how horror took a very radical turn in the 1970s and went from being B-movie crap to shock to where it became disturbing. And that's where we saw Jaws, Exorcist, Alien. Horror became legitimate storytelling, and what started to deal, Last House on the Left, Dawn of the Dead, or I'm sorry, Night of the Living Dead, and starting to tackle larger social issues. So that was a time when or I guess scary movies got a conscience and got a soul. And so we were seeing that emerge as well. So it was, and and a lot of that was in response to Vietnam, response to horrors, or Halloween and horror, and expressing it artistically is a therapeutic form. It's a coping mechanism. It's like comedy. This is the way I can take this hurt thing, this thing that really bothers me, and put it outside myself. And then we can all examine it and say, well, you should take the girl's shirt off, because that's what we did in 1970 films. But anyway, so no. So I find this stuff fascinating. Again, like, all right, I guess still origin story. So it wasn't until I graduated college. I was a haunter in high school, worked in several amazing haunts. But when I would send Halloween when I was involved with that, it just, in high school, you'd go to a friend's house and maybe you'd watch some movies and you'd kind of dress up a little bit. And I remember repeating, like, there's got to be more. There's more to this. We could feel more. There's something here. And I could just feel its absence, but not what it was. And so, went through college and then became respectable, put away my childish toys, put away my geek, put away my nerd. No longer indulged, focused on the important things, etc. And then I had a shoulder injury that took out my left shoulder for a couple of years. And we had been putting on bigger and bigger Halloween parties at our home, and was just kind of, learning how to build props and etc. And that was the year I couldn't have a Halloween party, because you can't hammer with one arm. You can't. And so I couldn't. So that year, my wife Brandy took me to all the haunts in the area, and there was a very sad moment when we would come out of all the haunts and we'd be with a group of friends. And what I was used to from my experience of haunting in the 80s, even during the Satanic Panic and blah blah blah, is when you got out of the haunt, you were just exploding with questions and conversations and what ifs. And when every haunt we got out of, it would get really quiet. And then someone would say, so yeah, want to go get a drink? And that was incredibly depressing to me. I'm like, no. That's not how it should be done. Like, I didn't have answers, but I was like, that's the wrong result. That's not the way it should be. And then we found out that there was a local haunted house in our town that no one knew about. And as we went through it, we discovered they had a contest. And so from there, I went up to all my neighbors who I had never met, anyone who had a home haunt in our area. I just knocked on their door and said, hi, I'm David. Want to go make something spooky out in the forest? And literally, that's how we did it. And I just went door to door to door until I got a bunch of people. And then we went out and we built our haunt, what was the first year of our haunt of Creatures of the Night, and accidentally created an urban legend of Mary at Mary S. Young Park. 6 months later, we started getting calls from the city, people freaking out, demanding to know, is that what really happened to the little girl? And that made me start trying to figure out, okay, why 6 months? Why is it happening now? And so that kind of began this process of kind of digging and finding out what Halloween was and what haunting really was. I even went back to school and did some postgraduate stuff just to figure out more of like what was happening on a neurological level. And then that led to us working in deeper elements of trauma recovery and even coming up with some unique ideas of how to accelerate people recovering in traumatic situations. And it's called Trauma Interrupt, and I'm still working with therapists, and so far the results are very successful. So it's kind of so I think this reminds me of it's not the fakirs, Indian form of philosophy, often comes across as comedy, is called
Sometimes we Google things later and we'll update our listeners.
Okay, so I'm killing me. So there's a very specific is philosophical form of faith, and one of the quotes that comes from it is that enlightenment, similar to Buddha's concept that there's 400 so many paths to Buddhism or into enlightenment. Buddhism but is just but one. That any path you pursue, and that you pursue it completely with yourself, will lead to enlightenment. Even if you were pursuing becoming a despot, a thief, the pursuit of that to the end point, you will unintentionally become enlightened through mastery. And so Halloween has honestly become my pathway to enlightenment. And I don't say that facetiously. Like, this is something we really dig into. And the more we find about history and then applications to life and applications to society and how this infects individuals and groups, this is kind of filling. So I'm using Halloween for my path to enlightenment. That would be a better origin story.
That's okay. Our conversations often take journeys. But yeah, and sometimes I don't even know what I was going to go there with that. I was like, so just interested, like, yeah, I'm just going to sit here and listen to you go on. And I just
sorry.
No, you're great. But you had something I thought a little bit ago. I thought you had your hand up for some reason, but
I already said that.
Okay,
said
gotcha.
what I was going to say, but you did.
Wait, can I throw one at you guys?
Sure.
Why do you think it's important for us to celebrate Halloween or to haunt?
Well, for me, I think you've already kind of touched upon it. It is one of the few holidays that does encourage the neighborliness. The other holidays are more insular with family. And I think that's what I think for me, I think that's what I think a lot of people get from it. The fact that it is the one thing that you can kind of connect with your neighbor on, even if for a momentary time.
Yeah, kind of the same. It's not, especially somebody that kind of, I don't really connect with my actual biological family very well. A lot of my family that's close to my heart are more adopted at this point. So really a lot of the holidays aren't for me, or aren't for people like me that feel like they're a little bit of that black sheepness. So Halloween doesn't require family as much to be enjoyed. You can usually find something to go to, some kind of event going on, either themes of concerts or themes of just shit to do in general, and like costume contests. And plus, like, there's also the escapism of like doing costumes, which is something I've always kind of dug. Like I more got into it at work. I started realizing it was kind of fun to do really good costumes at work, and how it would just, even people that you normally don't talk to would like come up and say hi to you. And it just kind of like bridged some gaps there and built some friendships that otherwise wouldn't happen, because some people find it really interesting when you're crafty and you apply that craftiness in a way that's like, oh, that's cool, and you're wearing it. Like, I still remember, I think the first costume that I super loved that I did was I did an old cat lady at my office, and that season, like, morale was so low that me and one other girl were the only two that like dressed up. And all I did was like, I looked up a quick how-to on how to make my face look really aged. And I got some gray silver hairspray, and I got an old robe, and I just like stitched some cats like all over it. And I made a walker out of PVC pipe and duct tape. And so it was like the first time I got into like, and I still have the picture. I'll totally find it, like just to share with you, David, just because it's kind of funny. But I've got that. And then there was also a year that I built like my own Sims dongle from like the Sims games.
Nice.
Yeah. And I put a glow stick in it and just put it on random. And I made it out of like an old cutting, like a little flimsy cutting board I got from the Dollar Tree, and some hot glue. And it's just like, it got really fun to start making stuff. So that's what really, I think, got me sucked into Halloween, like more than as a kid. Because unfortunately, like my raising in small town, like it didn't matter what I did. I still was uncool. It didn't matter what year it was or what season or what holiday was going on. But it took me a while to get into Halloween, but it came more as an adult. And it really broke into it, like I said, at office parties. And then I kind of realized you could have some fun with this.
And also, I think it allows you to see a portion of somebody's personality that you see every day, and you get to see a different aspect of them that it's not appropriate, or they don't feel that they've been able to share. And you get to that's when you get to find out more about people. There's an old Greek saying that we wear certain masks to tell specific truths.
So I know something you and I have nerded out about on the side a little bit is some of the interesting psychological themes that can be applied like across Halloween and our fears and how that even applies to haunt work. And we had talked about that you had learned, because you mentioned going back to school to learn more about this, and that you also teach classes. So I don't necessarily want to have you like teach like the same content that you would teach in classes, but I thought it might be interesting to go into maybe some of your favorites of like how monsters are representation of certain fears or phobias and like where some of those things come from. I think one that you didn't go into it, but you'd give an example of like werewolves and possibly vampires and some of the background of those creations of fears.
And also I think monsters are a good bellwether of where you are now. Because monsters are, when in storytelling, monsters are specific. They're deliberate. They're not random. They, as you know, thousands of years of story crafting, they represent something hyper specific or endemic of something that is facing that culture, that population, and they're trying to figure it out. It's actually kind of like an early form of science. And you don't know the answer. So we're putting these labels on it, kind of like the way that when astrophysicists talk about dark matter and dark energy, they are very upfront. Well, what is dark energy? Oh, we have no idea. We have like literally no idea. That's just the placeholder word we're using because we don't know what the heck it is. And we can't even, and that's kind of what a monster was. It was an early kind of science to say, I don't know why X, therefore this, and this is the image we now use in our shared language to represent this thing that we don't know what it is. Be it like a serial killer in Northern Europe for the werewolves, or rabies being used to alluding to vampirism, and also like werewolf in at least the Northern European version of it, or there's a wonderful book called Ghostland. I really recommend, and he has a philosophy, and I don't know if he came up with this quote or I did. I really don't. But that the idea is that we tell ghost stories to the living about the foibles of being alive. So that for example, a lot of the stories we tell about monsters or ghosts, etc., they're educational stories. They're morality tales. They are ways you should conduct yourself. And we still do that. The classic trope of like in slasher movies, if you go have promiscuous sex, you deserve to get killed. That we use that these stories had a purpose and intent. So like in Ghostland, he's actually wonderful at kind of showing how we use our American ghost stories and how we also kind of hide things from ourselves. For example, never mind, I won't geek down that hole, but it goes, yeah. So I don't know. I love, so, like right now, our monster de rigueur is generally the zombie.
Right. It's been that for like some time, right? So what does that tell us about nowadays?
So zombies are the biggest catch-all. They weirdly are, because they're non-individualistic. Frankenstein, Dracula, that is a face. That is something iconic. You can see that as a silhouette and you know exactly who that is. Jaws, you just need to see the fin. You know exactly what that is. A zombie's vague and kind of faceless and indeterminate. So zombies kind of represent our fears about biological weapons. The CDC, in its older kind of ethos, it also represents our sins coming back to us, our regrets, the things, maybe there's people from our past we don't want coming back, or maybe, think of it like an ex. There are people that we were completely in love with. Oh, the moon rose and set on them and we love. But right now, I don't really want that back in my life. It feels like it would be kind of like it would be tearing my flesh off and toxic and infecting me with things I don't really feel anymore. So I think zombies are the ultimate catch-all of our personal experience of regrets, things that we maybe not want to look at from our own past. As well as their plagues, they're CDC, they're biological weapons, they're general that the whole world is against us, and that those that look familiar are really your enemies. So like zombies are like this huge, they encompass everything. And it's also one of the things that's difficult now with the current movies, et cetera, is to tell a zombie story. You need a lot of them. It's rare that one zombie is representative outside of, what was it? Was it not Night of the Living Dead? Oh, the horrible Cappy one, Day After the Living Dead, whatever. Do you guys know the one I'm talking about? It was with the rockers, the punk rockers. It was, they open up a can. Tom Savini, Day of the Dead, yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
No, it's all right. So something will pick up in the editing room. What?
Return of the Living Dead? Return of the Living Dead?
Possibly, yeah. It could have been Return of the Living Dead, and that was the first time there was one zombie that you identified and went, "Oh, that's specific." And it was the, terribly thin actor portraying the one that had been wrapped up in the can for 30 years. And like, that's one of the few zombies that you can actually go, oh, I know who we're talking about. That or Baron Samedi from the James Bond movies, where he's playing, when they're doing voodoo and bringing the dead back to life. Zombies are kind of faceless. And that the fact that monster's been with us for a while, and it doesn't seem to be going away. But I'm kind of curious to watch, post 2020 to 2022, what we see in about 5 years. Is it the same thing, or does it start personifying? Does it become specific again?
Right. And it kind of makes sense, because when you talk about the themes of what zombies kind of cover, like it kind of goes to some of our bigger tinfoil hat things, right? Like there's a lot of conspiracy behind like the distrust of government experimentation, possible chemical warfare. I mean, even look at, some of the more extreme feelings against getting the vaccine, like thinking there's going to be a microchip or something in you. So I could totally see that manifesting, like now that you've kind of explained that. So I would almost wonder if we're going to go to some kind of weird cyborg thing or something to that level, because if kind you think about
transhumanism, right, consciousness and identity now being intermixed with the other. No, go on. I like that.
Yeah. See, now we could speculate about maybe what's going to happen, because I mean, this is the kind of madness. Oh, go ahead. Oh,
okay. So, that's right. So like, for example, this year, our haunt is very deliberately completely underwater. That's where our story takes place. And that was done intentionally. And that decision was actually made over a year ago, because we knew that's kind of where the consciousness most likely was going to be. And if you get online and start looking, there are a stupid number of haunts that are underwater this year, or have water-based themes, or that you're underwater. And that's all I'm simply doing, or we're doing, is aping what we saw happen after 9/11. So 9/11 happened, and then next season, ABC, CBS, etc., their shows were all around water, surface. There was another one, and then Lost, where they're isolated on an island surrounded by water. So, one of the things people were dealing with is we're not sure what the boundaries are anymore. We're not sure who to trust, what to trust anymore. And in water, when you're attacked, you never see it coming. So that was kind of the reaction post 9/11, is that we were caught so off guard. We were hit by something big that we didn't see coming. And suddenly that which wasn't familiar wasn't alluring anymore. Now it was dangerous and kind of scary and occluded from us. So where up until then, for example, like pre 9/11, haunted houses that were supposedly haunted were one of the hottest markets in real estate, especially like in places like Chicago, Boston, because people wanted to connect with the unknown. It was their chance to buy their way with an attempt to touch the eternal, or to have an experience that they could understand the universe, and that the mystery and that which wasn't known was exciting, and it was an exploration. Post 9/11, we kind of shut down, and now the outside's scary. And now with quarantine, outside scary. Who can you trust? Who's carrying? Who's got the virus? Who's got the whatever? Who's going to suddenly become violent when you try to discuss certain elements with them? So that we kind of felt like that ethos was reflected again. So of course we should be doing an underwater haunt again. and that is, that was a way of telling the story of what we're experiencing without using the tropes and props of what we're experiencing. So not using the play, whatever obvious metaphors, but you could represent it in your storytelling that would still resonate inside the brain to the parts that would go, oh no, I know this.
Yeah, because that's the whole thing, is like there's a whole psychology behind fears. And then of course we're going to use that to build haunted houses. And it's not as direct, right? Because when everything got shut down last year, I remember a lot of the haunt community really kind of through their own channels came together and was like, oh yeah, we're not touching any form of direct theme to this. Like no mad doctors and injections and virus, like no. But there are more zombies. And like you had said, underwater, because I know this is our first season. We're doing zombies. I can say that much because this is open on our website. I'm not spoiling anything, but we kind of have a little bit of that cannibal zombie theme going on. And that's something that, I didn't feel was as common in the haunts, just because it has been so penetrated into our entertainment as it is. It's almost like we got zombies in so many places. I didn't feel like a lot of haunted houses were doing zombies. So it is interesting that that's one of the themes that one of ours wound up landing on this year. So we didn't end up going, let me try that sentence again. Yeah. We did not end up going underwater like what you've seen, but it is interesting that even ours still hit one of those themes that kind of directs to dealing with something that we're dealing with, which is this idea of being infected by something that, I don't need to go on other than that. Like we all know there's kind of an overall concern of being infected by COVID. So the idea of being infected as a zombie is also kind of related to that in concerns.
And actually that's the weird fear of even people anti-vax, anti-mask. They're still, the fear that they're expressing is of being infected, not with a disease, but with a thought, with however it's constructed, it's still fear of being infected. And you see a very deliberate, aggressive facing to prevent any sort of contamination of discussing certain topics or even allowing certain topics to be allowed to be discussed. You're still seeing that fear of even bringing it up. I think, and I think there's so many, this is just our cheat code, but what you're doing is a brilliant way of also getting to the heart, because we're using metaphor and symbolism, and there's not just one metaphor or symbol that works. There's many different ways to represent a fear.
Yeah. And it goes into kind of what you've mentioned a few times. I told you I wanted to at some point ask specifically about, was that, our brains, they react a very certain way when we go through haunts. And you and I have both expressed that we have a feeling that a successful haunt can act in a way as a form of trauma therapy. Mm-hmm. And I think this is very much why haunts tend to be directed by what's going on. So like you had said, there's a lot of underwater haunts, and that was the same thing we saw after 9/11. So it's kind of interesting how that can happen. But what is some of the, I don't know if you did have any studies or any sort of stuff that you drew from as far as how that happens? Like what happens to our brain when we go into a haunt?
Tons of stuff. And I would also really recommend directing towards Margie Kerr, Kerr book, Scream, available at your local Pals bookstore. I do. She's one of the only haunters. She was an anthropologist who actually used her haunt as a research lab. The book's phenomenal. The book's good. The book's good. The gold is in the notes, is in her footnotes. When I went back to school and I was doing all this interpersonal neurobiology stuff and studying stuff about the amygdala and more understanding of the limbic system versus cortex and how poorly they communicate, that when I was going through that, I had Margie's book because I wanted to pull something out of it for a reference, and I started going through her footnotes and realizing that almost all the studies that I had independently researched and was drawing from were all listed in her book. So I really recommend her book. Again, the book's good, but the footnotes, reading it and understanding things like social baseline theory, and oh my Lord, it's incredible. But in answer to your question, which is what goes on in the haunt? So there's a whole bunch of things. So we are putting people in a heightened, deliberate state of anxiety. And we as haunters and professionals are responsible because we are putting a group into a situation that we want to keep them in anxiousness, but not put them over into flight, fright, freeze, because all three of those can be dangerous to themselves, to others, to our staff, and to our, it stops the line and it makes it so you can't tell the story to people anymore. So one of the things we see in haunts, so you guys know about the rule of three for comedy, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Rule of three, everyone knows it. A blank, and a blank. You set up a pattern and then you break the pattern. That's how comedy works. It's a pleasant surprise for your brain. Your brain's actually a little tickled because it starts to figure out the pattern and it's something slightly different and it finds that amusing. And with a haunt, it's always the rule of two. It is always the relationship between predator, prey, victim, bad thing, the moviegoer, the watcher, the taker of the story. And so we treat our stories as if it is a Joseph Campbell monomyth or a Jungian archetypal story, is that whatever story we're telling, that's not actually the story that's being experienced. The guest is actually the hero. They're going on a hero's journey and they are transitioning through a portal into another world. And once they do so, they will find monsters, trials, tribulations that they have to overcome. Not you. You're sweating and jumping up and down in your mask and making sure machines and lights work and that actors have water breaks and people can use the restroom and people are safe. But for them, they're a hero confronting a 15-foot spider. They're coming over. And so when you come out of that, you have decreased cortisol production for the next 30 to 45 days. You have increased endorphin production. People actually use it as a form of self-medication. This is part of why dark tourism of haunting exists. People use this to feel better about themselves. It also engages in something that I call the quick bond, which is when people are in a similar ecology mentally, and they recognize the other as being in there, and they work to problem solve their way through it. You see this a lot in teenage relationships and cliques when kids get together within a specific, situation, and now they're clicking, and they, during that time, your life depends on them, and there is 100% trust. And you find this in military and, people who are in war situations, that this is, you absolutely band of brothers kind of element. I'm trying to be clever on something, but it didn't work.
Yeah,
but
save my life.
And similar, and so in a haunt, it's always a story of a dyad, which is two people. And if you look at every single haunt photo, it's usually at their drop scare. It's always two people and they're doing the exact same thing. One of them is in like a Heisman trophy, kind of going, and the other one is laughing and their teeth are bared and they're laughing. And that's really the sound of a haunt. A haunt is really the sound of laughter, because those two people who are now quick bonding, even if you have strangers, groups that meet up, they will break into groups of two, and one will grab onto the other, and the other is laughing because it is an aggressive behavior. It's something like you see in simians, teeth bared, barking, ha, ha. And it is the fastest way we can convey to the other person that they're safe, and to tell the monster to back off, that I'm not scared of you, stay away. So it's one of the things I tell my actors, like, look, when you go boo, and never say boo, never say boo. Never say boo. It's the worst damn thing. In fact, I often will say, like, the minute you give them a release and where they scream, and which is crack for haunters, that's, their mana. That is the bread that feeds back. That is knowing that their actions went out in the universe and it ripples back, kind of like a stand-up comic with an audience. And so but weirdly, to really do what we're wanting to do, we're looking for laughter and silence. Because I want something that they can't find an answer to and they don't have a reaction to, and it puts them in an uncomfortable new place where they're having to deal with something. And then when they come out of the haunt, that's when I hear people explode. Did you see, what was that? Because if I can do that, then when they come out of the haunt, there's a conversation. And that's what I'm always going for. So often I have to haul our actors back because they want to go for the, because that's the most fun. That's the best. But the problem is also when the brain's in panic mode, when you're going through a haunt, you're dumping everything about every 15 seconds or less because your brain needs to take on the new thing. And also in a haunt, you're generally going through multiple portals, which, there was a bunch of studies a couple of years ago, that feeling of when you go upstairs and you don't remember why you go up, there's a reason for that. That's one of the things that kept our species alive. The beautiful phrase is evolution favors the anxious, it devours the satiated. So having your head on a swivel is but the problem is in a haunt, if you just are going boo ah, your brain has to dump all the previous boo ahs because they're not relevant anymore, and you need to be ready for the next one. So it's dumping them. And one of the most depressing things, and I've told this story many times, is I'll go to a haunt and and we'll go around the country and in conventions, and we'll see them all over the country. And so we're with professional haunters, owners, actors, makeup, stagecraft, and I'll wait about 10 minutes till we get out of the haunt, and I always ask the same question: can you describe one character that we saw in that haunt? And the answer is almost always no.
Yeah.
And I find that insulting.
See, and I think you and I feel similarly about that, because I've noticed when you set up your first room or two to be a story, they tend to remember it a little bit better, because for some reason they remember the person that talked them into this place being safe. And then after that, they might remember, oh my gosh, that zombie in that hall, or around this one corner, this one jump scare. Like, they might remember. But I have noticed, I don't know if that's anything you've played with, but when you've got a story that you're drawing them into in the beginning, and if you've got a character that makes them feel like it's trustworthy and safe, they do tend to remember that person. And so I've found that interesting. And I've had others that are characters like in middle spots, right? Because not every room is a jump and get you.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is a mad scientist just muttering to themselves over this carcass thingy that they're doing science to. And there's that too, but they still don't seem to remember those characters as well, because they never tried to portray themselves as trustworthy. So I have found that a little bit interesting. And sometimes when I catch like people at the end, especially in the earlier season or earlier end of the season when I can.
There's a quote by Stanislavski when he's talking to one of his teachers saying, your fault is you play your tragedy in general, and generality in any form of art is dangerous. It disappears. It didn't serve its function. Like in a haunt, after your introduction and your resolution, the middle characters should be probably really hitting exposition, moving the story along. They should be anxiety producing or heightening it, not necessarily being a relief valve, or you're using a scene or element as a cool down so that the next scare works. So like you're kind of, and I'm sure there's more categories, but like you're kind of always having to fall in three. And if your character or scene doesn't do one of those functions, it erases it. There's no reason to hold on to it because it didn't convey any information that was useful. You went boo, you went and then you moved on, but there was nothing that made a deep anchor. And that's what we're always trying to do. Is we're trying to, effectively, all haunters are trying to, in 1.5 seconds, evoke an existing memory or monster by shape, silhouette, movement, however, air pressure. And you are evoking an existing fear or monster. You're then creating a relationship, and then you have to create an unanswerable question. And if you can create the unanswerable question, then 6 months later, months later, that person's amygdala, limbic system is still processing that because it can't find an answer. Oh, and here, actually, can I ask you guys a question? Because this is something I discovered in the last year that I was wrong, and I am so happy to find this out. Tim, when you went through a haunted house, or specifically like a haunted house or a situation that doesn't involve a police report and doesn't have to end with show the judge on the puppet where he touched you, what was something that got you, that stayed with you and kept coming back?
Oh man, it's like I told the Reverend here. I was the cynical type when I went through, because this past week the professor and I went through the Fairlandia haunt.
So Season of Screams.
Wonderful.
Yeah, the one that we're doing.
So it was 3 different haunts, of course. I was the one that was laughing at the professor's reaction because because it was great being behind her. Now, if I walked through alone, it would, maybe some of the jump scares, some of the boo moments I would have been startled by, but I'm a cynical guy. I would have been, oh, that's nice. But the experience for me was more enjoying it with the professor and her reaction of 7 minutes plus of straight screaming. That was great.
Okay. But okay, so that was the experience with them. When were you going through a haunt and a scene got you? Like affected you?
I don't know, through a haunt. I mean, I guess the best thing I can think of right now would be a time I saw Scream 2, and it was at the beginning. It was, I think the actor was Omar Epps. He had his ear up against the side of a bathroom stall, and then that's when the killer stabbed him. But what happened is the moment that the killer stabbed the guy behind me got up and hit his foot with my seat at the moment that the kill happened. So throughout the entire movie, I was tense, thinking oh my God, somebody's going to get me.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. Reverend.
I don't know if I have one, because see, that was always the weird fact about me is I don't go through haunted houses.
None of us do either. Creatures, we don't like scary movies. Creatures, we don't like to get scared.
Okay.
Do you have a haunt walk? Do you have a haunt walk? Like a specific walk you use in a haunted house that slows down, speeds up, moves to the left, makes it so that the actor can't predict you?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, they will get me sometimes, they'll startle me, but it's because I've walked it so much and I'm the one that places everybody. The only haunt I go through, being the one that I work for, nothing really has ever affected me to that level where it really got me. I mean, it is kind of, actually, no, that's July this season. Okay. Gotcha. So now it wasn't during the haunt though. It was outside of the haunt hours. I had gotten there early, and you remember Justin. He also haunt.
Wonderful.
Awesome dude. And he's normally doing more of the managerial side. He's leading and roaming and doing awesome shit and helping build too. He's a full force haunter. He's great. So I'm standing there, and it's maybe 30-40 minutes before casting call. So nobody should have been there, even really. But he shows up early, and I just hear what sounds like this just blood curdling scream. And it cuts right through me, in a way that wasn't expected. And I think it was a little bit of a mix of, I wasn't expecting it because it wasn't haunt hours and there's so few people there. And I'm like, oh my God, who is hurt? And what it was is he brought this Aztec death whistle.
Yeah. Yes. Here, I have 5 of them we've made from home. We reverse engineered it a couple of years ago. We were blowing it at West Coast a couple of years ago.
See, I want one now, and I've got a friend with a 3D printer that's trying to help set me up with one so I can use it too. But it's so effective because it's just every time he blows it, it takes me a second.
Here, pause for 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
This is where the elevator music kicks in. So there we go. So how have you been?
I'm good. This has been a delightful chat.
There we go.
Put my soft radio voice on.
Coming up next on Light FM, Michael Bolton.
You got the next hour with the Reverend. Bringing in the chill vibes into the weekend.
So sorry about that. So about 8 years ago, I'm always looking at the history, et cetera, stumbled on the Aztec death whistle. And then we started making our own and now print our own. And if I get off my butt, I'll probably buy a 3D printer but this year I'm not using it because this isn't a year to be expelling waterborne particles into the air by trying to push through a mask with velocity.
Yep.
They sound best in little ravines, areas where you can get a bit of echo and muffling and damping. But generally, it's the sound of like a 13-year-old girl screaming or a monster screaming.
So the recording picked up a little.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's not. Maybe I got the COVID.
And it's also kind of hard to pick up over the mic, but you can hear it just for that little second before it hits that range that it doesn't pick up. But yeah, the reason I want it though is because of how loud it is. And that was actually a thing created for the very purpose of it sounds like a blood curdling scream. Like that's what it was originally used for.
It was a weapon of war.
Death whistle. Like, yeah, it was to go in and instill fear because it sounded like such a blood curdling scream. And so what I realized, like, wait a second, if I need to tell my monsters to please wake up and let's give them hell, that would be a really great battle cry. So that's why I was trying to get one, was the emergency halls. But I'm with you. Normally it would be a very effective thing, but that goes again into the interesting challenges of
this year
doing a haunt in a COVID season, which did you have anything before I went into kind of Alaska?
Oh, I was going to say one of the the reason I started like really running with the death whistle is I was in a haunt in Tennessee. And it was, standard, all southern haunts tend to be a hillbilly swamp story. That's just what they tend to be. Very few about slave uprisings. Anyway, the very few, a lot of plantations, no slave. Anyway, so we were in this outdoor haunt, and it at one point there was a sound. And I never found the origin of what that sound was or what the thing that produced it was. So like that was one of the most interesting things about that haunt, was there was some weird sound that we heard and I could never figure out. And so my brain was always waiting for that thing, because it had already been telegraphed. Every movie show, you hear the monster before you see it. You hear the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. So you know that, oh, that means it's coming. It's the same reason that we use scents before we have a monster, so that the gustatory part of the brain goes, oh, I know something's coming because I recognize this smell, that this is a bad thing's about to happen. And yes, and so no, I love that when you can put that in and never show cause. But it gets in, it hits, it has a resonance, but you never figure out what it was, meaning it got someone else and not you. So your brain is now trying to figure out why it survived, that's what I found when I was interviewing Leonard Pickle and everybody else, these amazing Ed Roberts and all these amazing haunters when we first started. And I would ask them, what's the scene that got you? For guys, it was almost invariably that they had realized that they had been watched or had been vulnerable for like a second or two before they became aware of the other person. And then their brain is now in fear for when it will happen again. So, and invariably when you talk to them, they always say, well, it was a really crappy haunt, or it was like a low end haunt. So, their expectations were low. And at some point they realized that they were being watched, or they got away and they didn't know how. And 2 years ago at HauntCon in New Orleans, listening to Marguerite Keir and Amy from 13th Door in Denver and they actually had a panel of women haunters. And then afterwards, I kind of talked to them all and I said, well, what's the scare that got you? Very different reaction. They were personal and usually body oriented. So like Amy described one where she walked into a scene and there was a woman with a bare midriff. It wasn't sexual, but her stomach was bare. And she was just rubbing a black goo into herself. And it created questions. Is that sexual? Is that progenitive? Is that, is this disturbing? Is this something toxic? Is it something infecting? Does this have to do with a possible pregnancy, one way or the other? And from the face I'm seeing on Tracy, yes, I'm seeing it in your face. It's all scrunched up and gross. So like that, and like, whoa, that opened, like, so I was like, okay, this is the haunt. And, we're in a male dominated industry and I don't think that's awesome. And suddenly like going, oh, there's this whole new door, a whole new experience. Like, this is how we should be crafting things, getting in their head with things that aren't obvious. Things are nonverbal, things that take a second and no longer, but they make it so that later you're still like, I don't know what the hell that was. And, so Anyway, I don't even know what question we were talking about, but thank you both for the answers. I really appreciate it. That's helpful to me.
That's okay.
Yeah.
And then did you have anything else, Tim?
Yeah, I was going to ask, you did mention about haunt design, that you're intentionally creating anxiety. Speak to the psychology behind it, I guess. I mean, because for the season of Screams that I went to, I'm sure it was probably due to the location, but the maze that we were put through, I could see leading to anxiety. The odd edges on the walls kind of leading you through. So
it makes you
some of that.
intentionally claustrophobic, like some of those winding edges. So that's some psychology I know we played with that you're talking about. There's some of the winds build on claustrophobia. And the thing is there's actually something natural about the human body that has a resistance to being shut into things. That's why there's like a fear of being buried alive or being like locked into something small. So yeah, excellent example of like using the psychology. So what are other psychologies, I guess, that you use? So,
by the way, I will prompt this. I run a subreddit on the Reddits. It's called Creatures of the Haunt. It's really where I dump all my ideas. It's effectively just a large notebook where I can pull up all the ideas that I found without just having thousands of bookmarks, and I label them and things. So I've actually got a bunch of articles and videos about specifically audio and what makes certain audio horrifying, why the tonalities that come out of the Aztec death whistle, why they're effective, what's happening inside the brain, as well as why certain tones work in music, in horror movies, like the Friday the 13th, the word that's being spoken in that theme is actually, he took the word mother and kill. And so in Friday, or no, I'm sorry, it was Halloween. And he's just going, or no, it is Friday the 13th. Kill. And he, cut it and chopped it up. So like, and there's several. So anyway, if you go to Creatures of the Haunt, I actually have a bunch of articles by people who are much smarter on me of specifically why trifold chromatic chords create anxiety and why certain things. So we're keeping them on an auditory. We're using gustatory. So our Mary character, we use Froggy Fogg's Gothic. That's right, Gothic by Froggy Fogg, as the scene for Mary. So every time you smell that scent, which is, pennyrows and, kind of older Victorian smells, then you're safe. So that's one of the ways we indicate. So before you enter Mary scene, you are smelling. So gustatorily, we're hitting that. As you go into our haunt, we will follow 90 degrees. But the minute we have transported you to another world, you will not run into a 90-degree angle after that. So and these aren't things so in a haunt, we deliberately are writing, besides what we do with Family and Haunt Junior and the Creature Candle, we are always intentionally writing two completely different scripts in our layout and our design. One is to the cortex, which is where all the narrative and story functions and lines of dialogue, that's where that all resides. And that's what makes the story flows. And that's where your 3, act structure works. But I'm also specifically writing to the amygdala and the limbic system because that overrides the cortex, and they communicate horrifically poorly. And that's actually how we started figuring out some interesting trauma stuff. But so when we're writing to the amygdala, I want things that the amygdala kicks off. There's a lot of things we can invoke. So if you grew up in the 70s, you watched a show called In Search Of, because it's had Leonard Nimoy, and Leonard Nimoy would come on and say, in search of, if he suggested that Bigfoot was real and Atlantis existed, then bugger hell yes they did, because Leonard frickin' Nimoy said it. And when he says it, you're like, no, that's 100% what it is. That's clearly. And there was one audio clip that they played from Washington of a Bigfoot team. They cut to a group of biologists, they're recording, and they hear this Bigfoot scream. And I can play that for people. Same with the audio of the grinding stones from the Blair Witch Project. At this point, people have consciously, they can't access that memory anymore. They don't remember that sound with what it had to do. So much time's passed. But I'll play that sound for people who are affected by them. And all I'm watching is their forearm. I am glued to their forearm because, and the first time I brought my brother in and I said, hey, remember this sound? And I did the Bigfoot from the 70s. We're 7 years old when in Southern California, we're looking out our window just in case there was a Bigfoot invading the orange groves of Orange County, because that happens. And I play it for him and he goes, no, I've never heard it before. And I look at his arm and every single hair, every follicle is standing straight up on end. And like, so he's the child for one of the things for the amygdala is that time doesn't pass. It doesn't have a lot of memory. It's an old olfactory bulb in our brains that evolved into this, but time doesn't pass. So evoking specific sounds from somebody's childhood that are tragic or evoke specific monsters, we're always doing that. And then we're always messing with expansion and contraction, putting people in large, wide spaces and then immediately compressing them as long as we are compliant with ADA. And all proper zoning regulations. So we're always playing with expansion, contractions, always scare on the left, not the right, because most people are right-handed. So we're always unintentionally turning to the right. By the way, children, if you want to increase your grade about a 10%, find out which hand your teacher is dominant in, sit on the first to second row on that side of them. They will unintentionally always turn towards you and make eye contact. And when they see you making eye contact back, when they're later grading, they will go, nah, they were there. They know what I was talking about. And that your grade goes up. So you always want to scare from the left when possible. You want to be, because that's not where people are looking. We're looking to the right. Scare out of the periphery, never a direct line of sight. Leonard Pickle laid down the rule, 8 to 12 feet, you got to change an angle. Never let them see past 8 to 12 feet. What else do we do? We're doing audio, we're doing sound, we're doing smells. Tactile's kind of off the table this year. Oh, one of the things I desperately want to do is we deliberately put in rests. So once you take people to a state of anxiety, you have to give them a cool down period because you can't keep someone screaming for 30 straight minutes. They won't retain anything. They won't recall anything. So you've got to let them reset. What I really want to do is build a negative decibel room so that when people enter it, it's, especially if they've been in high stimulus, have zero stimulus coming in, and the brain is going to try to fill in the gaps and is going to try to fill in what's not there. And I really want to play with that and just see what its reaction is. One of the things I really want to do, and it's based on social baseline theory and by James Porges or Cohen. And when people break into the dyads, if you notice, normally one person grabs onto the protector. Whoever in that group they decide's the protector, that's the jacket that will be grabbed. And that person will be used as a meat shield throughout the haunt as the person tries to hide behind it. And so one of the ways to affect that is not to scare the one way to do that is to scare the protector, but they are too invested because they know that someone else that they care for is relying on them to look brave. So they're going to double down on that. So that's not the way to attack them. Although it would seem to be. So you wait till you have that dyad, the protector and the person being protected. And what you need to do is you need to convince the protector that they failed to protect and leave the protected person alone, that they're safe. They have to stay safe. But that the protector is absolutely convinced that something horrible has happened to the other person, and if possible, while holding hands. And there's a whole, we had this beautiful scene. Unfortunately, we haven't had the resources to build it again, but I really want to build that, and I want to video it, and I want to study it. So that's like psychology, how we want to do it. I want to completely undermine your pinnings of faith and belief on a personal level of what you believe is safe. But towards the end goal, that when you come out of the haunt, you're going to feel empowered. You're going to feel that you just overcame this horrible situation and that you are a better person. And you and I talked about this off script about how empowering being on a haunt is for our actors, for our cast. And many people have heard this story. When we first started, a therapist confronted me about our haunt, a local therapist. I mean, like very aggressively. And it took a long time to find, or it took a while to find out what was really going on. But eventually found out that one of our people saw that person professionally. And the therapist had turned to them and said, I know your history. Why are you out in the forest at 11:30 with strangers in the dark? I know your history. That should be the one place you would never be. This person said 2 sentences that made it so I don't get to stop doing this because I don't know who that person is and I don't know if they're still part of our team. They said, you don't understand. This is the one place I'm safe.
Yep.
So their home, their school, possibly a place of worship. The safest place for that individual is to be surrounded by other monsters in the dark and cold and rain, that's safer and that they know they're safe. And we work really hard on anyway. So that, and then the second part is they said, you don't understand. And this is something we impress on our very much on our haunters. This is the one night I can change my community. I can't just change my relationship with my friend. I can't just change my dynamic with a family. This is the one night I make my community different. This is the one night. And again, we hearken back to the sound of a haunt is laughter. We have thousands of people going through our haunt, binding, connecting, and laughing. One of my favorite moments on our haunt is when I had an adult entertainer and a young missionary from a very conservative faith working together to build scenes towards a common goal. There were no differences between those people. There was only commonalities. There was no that you have this political ideology, you have these life value ideologies, and I'm now reject you because of that. No, they were agreed because they were on the same focus. They were going towards the same goal, which was this inner child, this magical, this experience. And they delighted in each other, where if given time, they probably would have never spoken ever under any condition. And so those are elements of psychology, therapy, blah, blah. But that's kind of why we have to do it, is because this is the safest place for people. This is the one night we can change the world in a meaningful way, in a localized way. And we are part of a grand history that does this. This is also, we are part of the great, what's happening globally or in our country, in our state or county or city, that at that moment, we as a people species are united in this is the night we all get along. Aunt Bessie doesn't get drunk and start talking about politics and somebody throws the turkey. And by the way, who the hell puts oysters in stuffing anyway? And I don't forgive you for what you said about our Becky 3 months ago. And how dare you ruin 4th of July? You don't put raisinets, you put raisins in the salad. So this is, on so many micro to macro levels. This is the one thing I can throw all my faith into, because this is the one thing that I can't find a downside to. And you were talking about the candy. There's only been, or at least the last time I researched, all of the Tylenol scare kind of re-emphasized that. And then in the 60s, it was that teenagers were going to put acid in all the candy. And it's whatever, it's the monster of that era. What's the fear that we're countering? In Chicago, I think they told children that the Edmund Fitzgerald had been put in Snickers bars. Pause for laughs. Moving on. Okay, so there's only been 2 cases of a child dying from candy, and both of them were family. Yeah. One was a young child taking their older sibling's heroin. The other was an uncle killing a family member for the insurance money using a pixie stick. Beyond that, there are no instances of it actually happening. Again,
that's like a bittersweet note to wrap it up on, right?
Oh,
because it's like, it doesn't really happen as often, so don't worry about your kids. But here's some 2 really fucking horrible stories but it was just family, not strangers. But that's a stranger danger is something that I could just have an entirely single episode on, and the damage that stranger danger has kind of done, but also just there's not a lot of evidence in it, but yeah. And I guess the only thing that I wanted to touch on as we wrap up is that total agreement of it being a very therapeutic scene to work in. It is so empowering to be the thing behind the mask. I'm very open that I have CPTSD. I've only gotten as far as getting diagnosed as PTSD, but I didn't have a stable feeling a lot of my life growing up. So the first time I did haunt work, I found it oddly empowering because I knew for once, I knew something that was going to happen that somebody else didn't know, but I didn't even have the guilt of feeling bad about it, because otherwise I wouldn't have the draw to do that. But this is something that they want. So wait a second, I get this feeling of empowerment, and I'm also giving this person the endorphin rush and the release that they want, because this is like their roller coaster. Okay, I get it. There's a relationship here where I can have empowerment in my life, and then this person can also get the thing that they really wanted. So it's a mutually beneficial contract between haunter and victim. And so, like, I love how that's even manifested into some of the decisions that I make, like going into casting. Like, I tend to be very aware of somebody who has anxiety, because first of all, they're normally pretty open to talk to me about it. In this instance, because they almost want me to know. And it's amazing how much it's easy to groom that person to do something they didn't think they could do. And oh my gosh, they just get a thirst for it. And then they completely transform as a human across a month. But Tim, did you have any other little final notes so that we can?
Oh, can I ask a question before we go to final?
Sure.
Yeah, one more question.
Okay, so Resident Tracy, what's a costume you wore, either trick-or-treating when you were young or later, that really filled your heart? What was a costume, a persona you put on that filled something in you or made you feel like you were reaching out and becoming something?
I got that one hands down. So that would be the second year that I worked for Fearlandia, because the first year I got promoted, I throw that up in quotes, up to their front room. Well, because I never really realized that the front room is kind of a very difficult room to work, because you're setting the pace, you're bringing them into the world, you're doing timing, you're doing so much stuff. And a lot of the haunt relies on that. So I didn't realize what a compliment that was when they had me pop up into the front room. And so the second year was very much on purpose, and I got to help design the room, and it was clowns. And I decided I wanted to do a ringmaster character. And so it was the first time I actually made, you know who I'm talking about.
Yep.
The first time I made a character and a persona, and she had a voice. I created this crazy voice for this person because I also needed to be human and silly, that if somebody brought the 10-year-old child in there, that I could relate to them. So it was the first time that, like, I really built a character. She wound up being named Moxie by the end of it. Like, and she had like a distinct makeup thing and stuff that she said, and I could make people laugh, and I could also scare them. Like, it was such a dynamic character role to play, because in haunt work, it's not always scaring, because if you can't make them scream, make them laugh. If you can't make them laugh, make it awkward. Like, you can make, there's so many, you're looking for a reaction. And so that was the first one that I got to really play with the range of reactions, because she was a little silly, but she was also kind of scary because her face looked like it was half torn off. So that was that, hands down, that's the haunt character that really, I knew I had caught the bug. Like, the first year, as much as I loved it, the second year was when I realized I was like hook, line, and sinker going to keep doing this when I could.
Okay. Tim, I got a different one for you.
All right.
What do you value most in your friendships? What do you value most in your friends or the relationship?
Oh, man. The trust I build with them.
Tease that out. No, tease that out. I'm going to go with love. Okay, that's my no. Tease that out of it. Why does that have meaning? Why does that resonate? How does that reflect in you and them?
Well, I mean, if anything, it builds upon, my past history, my, mental history, my issue with anxiety and whatnot. When it's difficult to get to know people, when you do build that trust with somebody, you treasure that trust with your life.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it.
David will throw you through curveballs. I can't tell you how many conversations we've had. It was like, how did we get on that one? But anywho, I think with that, maybe we should go ahead and wrap up this one. But David, I would love to have you on, like, again, maybe even next year, and we can cover different topics around Halloween season and spooky season all together.
Anytime, anything you want to talk about, we'll dive down it. If I can just do the props, I'm David D. Jones. I am with Creatures of the Night. You can find them on creatureshaunt.com. And always, please go to the subreddit, r Creatures of the Haunt or Creatures of the Night. That's where I have filled thousands of articles, or hundreds, of anthropology, history, audio, music, psychology, prop design, costumes, fears, phobias, and feel free to use it however is most beneficial to you.
Thank you so
Perfect.
much.
We will have that in the show notes. Thank you again for being on. And every Wednesday and Saturday in this podcast space, we will have something to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Farewell.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.